Thanks to Marvel proving that interconnected cinematic storytelling could not only work, but make billions at the box office, it's led to many other studios rushing to copy their formula, looking to create cinematic universes of their own. However, it may surprise you to learn that Marvel was not the first studio to do this. In the 1930s and 40s, Universal Studios pioneered the concept of cinematic crossovers with their roster of movie monsters long before the modern era of superhero franchises. Although not initially conceived of as a cinematic universe, the idea to have their movie monsters cross over into each other's films came to fruition after Universal had already spent a decade producing standalone films and sequels for characters such as Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Mummy. So what prompted Universal to all of a sudden decide to start teaming up their movie monsters? Well, according to legend, it's because screenwriter Kurt Siodmak needed a writing job to afford the down payment on a new car he wanted to buy, and jokingly suggested to producer George Wagner that he team up two of Universal's most popular monsters, Frankenstein and the Wolfman, as a way to do it. To his credit, Wagner saw dollar signs and told Siodmak to buy the car as he had 2 hours to agree to write the script, thus launching Universal's cinematic monster universe. Universal would follow Frankenstein meets the Wolfman with other crossovers such as 1944's House of Frankenstein, which saw Dracula added to the mix, as well as several ridiculous Abbott and Costello crossovers that saw them meet Frankenstein, the Invisible Man, and the Mummy, before the fad would eventually peter out. Fast forward to the present day and the birth of the MCU, whose success would inspire Universal to reboot their very own cinematic universe of monsters. Except with some better planning, they could have actually beaten Marvel to the punch. In 1999, Universal rebooted The Mummy for modern audiences, reimagining it as a fun, swashbuckling-like adventure featuring plenty of scares, laughs, romance, and revolutionary visual effects. Plus, from top to bottom, everyone in this cast shined, with Arnold Vosloo being a particularly frightening villain. The success of the film would not only lead to 2 sequels and a spin-off, launching Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's acting career in the process, but also gave Universal the confidence to begin rebooting their other monster films, starting with 2004's Van Helsing, directed by the same man who directed The Mummy, Stephen Sommers. Unfortunately, even with Sommers at the helm, Van Helsing would fail to replicate the success of The Mummy, and its failure would hinder Universal's ability to do crossovers and also breathe new life into the Mummy franchise, which seemed to be on its last legs creatively by the time Tomb of the Dragon Emperor came out.
Here we go again.
And while that film was still financially successful, instead of pursuing a 4th film, Universal decided to reboot the series yet again, following the absolutely abysmal and largely forgotten Wolfman from 2010, as they embarked on creating the interconnected cinematic universe they could have created in the early 2000s. However, when they made this decision, they were deep into production on Dracula Untold, which was not designed to launch any sort of cinematic universe, but instead act as an origin story, which is why the working title for the film was originally Dracula Year Zero. But once Universal decided to proceed with their dark universe, Dracula Untold became the unofficial first film, with plans for Luke Evans' Dracula to appear in subsequent films. To make this possible, Universal ordered last-minute reshoots so that the film would end with Dracula appearing in the present day. Universal, though, would downplay Dracula Untold's connection to the series and instead publicly announced that The Mummy would be the first official entry in the dark universe. And to run it, Universal turned to writers Alex Kurtzman, who successfully relaunched Star Trek with J.J. Abrams in 2009, and Chris Morgan, credited with rebooting the Fast and Furious series and turning it into a billion-dollar franchise. The Mummy would be delayed, however, after Kurtzman saw X-Men Days of Future Past. At the time, Kurtzman had finalized his design for the Mummy, and in an effort to make the character more relatable, gave him a blue skin pigmentation that made him an outcast. But after seeing the design for Apocalypse at the end of Days of Future Past, Kurtzman was shocked to see that it was the exact same design he had created for his character, and decided to start the script over, making the Mummy a woman and nixing the skin pigmentation angle. To star in the film, Universal cast one of Hollywood's most marketable names, Tom Cruise, which set the standard for the other A-listers they intended to cast to portray the rest of their movie monsters. Except Universal didn't see these characters as monsters, and in an effort to compete with Marvel, wanted to reimagine them as scary yet sympathetic superheroes with nefarious powers and abilities. And we'd first get a taste of this with Dracula Untold. Following the announcement that Tom Cruise would star in the film, the next big name added to the cast cast was Russell Crowe, with the Academy Award winner slated to play the dual personalities of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which would have seen him act as a sort of Nick Fury, heading up his own version of S.H.I.E.L.D. called Prodigium, a secret organization dedicated to hunting supernatural threats. And like Marvel, Crowe's Dr. Jekyll would have assembled a team to combat one of those threats. Rounding out the team would have been Javier Bardem as Frankenstein's monster, Angelina Jolie as the Bride of Frankenstein, Johnny Depp as the Invisible Man, Dwayne Johnson as the Wolfman, and Channing Tatum as Van Helsing, with the idea that Luke Evans' Dracula would join the fold as well. Although with all due respect to Luke Evans, he seems like the odd man out here amongst this all-star cast of A-listers, which leads me to believe had the Dark Universe moved forward, Dracula would have been rebooted and recast. On the topic of A-listers, it's also worth noting that Universal was only able to sign Tom Cruise in exchange for giving up significant creative control on the picture. And finding himself unhappy with the script, Cruise would bring in a number of writers to rework it, led by his longtime collaborator Christopher McQuarrie. Together, they transformed the film into a typical Tom Cruise action vehicle, putting the movie star front and center while diminishing Sofia Boutella's screen time as the Mummy. Cruise even rewrote the ending to basically make him the new Mummy, giving him all of the Mummy's powers and abilities to deploy in the sequel. Not only that, but as a director, Alex Kurtzman was pretty green and found himself in over his head when it came to directing such large-scale action scenes, leading Cruise to basically take over the film and micromanage it. For example, Kurtzman originally planned to shoot the plane crash scene with wires on a rotating set. However, upon Cruise's insistence, Kurtzman was forced to shoot the sequence on the Vomit Comet, which simulates the illusion of weightlessness. This change led to a grueling shooting process involving 64 takes, which saw several crew members suffering from motion sickness, as Cruise basically ghost-directed it along with several other of the film's major action sequences. Unfortunately, what Cruise, McQuarrie, Kurtzman, and even Universal failed to realize was that fans didn't want these movie monsters reimagined as pseudo-superheroes, as Marvel and DC had already cornered and flooded that market. Instead, Universal had an opportunity to do something different here and carve out a niche of their own, with a shared universe of terrifying horror films, featuring the most iconic movie monsters of all time. Just prior to the film's release, negative word of mouth began to spread, leading Universal to quickly release a publicity photo featuring the first and only glimpse of what the star-studded Dark Universe cast would look like for their version of Phase 1. And in a sign of how disorganized and mismanaged the Dark Universe was, not only would we subsequently learn that this picture was photoshopped, with none of the cast having actually been together when it was taken, but it was also missing the star of the film that was intended to come out next, that being Angelina Jolie as the Bride of Frankenstein. David Koepp, the writer behind Jurassic Park and various other Spielberg films, would be hired to pen the script, while Bill Condon, director of several Twilight films and the live-action Beauty and the Beast, would be hired to direct. Ironically, Condon previously won an Oscar for writing Gods and Monsters, a film about legendary director James Whale, whose credits included 1935's Bride of Frankenstein. According to Koepp, Bride of Frankenstein was going to be a very big, lavish, beautiful, gothic horror spectacle, with the first third of the movie taking place entirely in the 1870s, akin to the original Frankenstein movies, before the Bride of Frankenstein would become sort of inert for 150 years, and then rediscovered and reawakened in the present day, which would have allowed her to then engage with Cruise, Russell Crowe, and the other characters from the Dark Universe. The story was also imagined as a liberation tale about a female monster created for companionship, but who has quite the opposite in mind. Koepp's goal was to replicate how the classic films in the genre lent themselves to metaphor, and felt this story created the opportunity to explore women's rights in today's Me Too era. He also wanted to explore how the rich elite are trying to extend their lives and cheat death, using Frankenstein's monster, which would have been played by Javier Bardem, as a mirror for the life extension work that's being researched in Silicon Valley right now. After The Mummy failed to captivate audiences at the box office, Universal would pump the brakes on the Dark Universe.
What I really admired about Universal is they threw up their hands and said, whoa, hold on. This isn't working out. Let's stop and just think for a year or two.
Unfortunately, The Mummy in the Dark Universe seemed snakebit from the start, with mistake after mistake being made along the way. For example, when Universal released the trailer to the film online, they forgot to add the music and sound effect tracks, leading to an unintentionally hilarious version featuring a screaming Tom Cruise aboard a silent crashing plane. Following this failure, Universal went back to making standalone films, wisely teaming with the low-budget horror hit machine Blumhouse. The first of these collaborations was The Invisible Man, which went back to basics and was one of the most frightening horror films in years, proving that the source material for terrifying modern-day reboots is hiding in plain sight. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.